Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this info session for the Harvard Law Review Public Interest Fellowship. My name is Priscilla, and I'm the president of the Law Review. Nico, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Nico. I am the Vice President Treasurer of the Law Review, and Priscilla and I are really excited to present this exciting opportunity and also get to know some of our fellows who are joining us today. So yeah, great to be here.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is, let me just admit a few people that are in the waiting room. Sorry about that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly go over the fellowship requirements, and then we're going to allow Melanie and Dee to introduce themselves and share where they're at, their projects they worked on, any advice they have, and then we're going to open it up for a Q&A session. Okay, so as some of you may know, the Harvard Law Review Fellowship supports recent Harvard Law School graduates with a demonstrated interest in serving the public interest through their work and scholarship. Each fellow will receive a $65 stipend, and at the end of the fellowship year, each fellow is expected to publish a piece of legal scholarship that draws on the fellow's work during the fellowship year in the Law Review's online forum. How to apply. So our application is due on November 14th, 2022 at 5 p.m. via the Carrot portal. The link should be on our website, but if you cannot find the link, please let us know. And what's required or what you need to apply is a short project proposal, 700 words max. Sorry if I seem distracted. I'm just admitting people in our waiting room. So a short project proposal, 700 words maximum, 2 letters of rec. I know we've gotten a few questions about that, like whether it's required for a Harvard professor to write a letter of recommendation, especially if you are a year or 2 out of the law school, etc. So we don't have a requirement that you need a Harvard professor to write one. I think as long as you have someone that can speak to your abilities and the project that you might work on would work well for your letter of recommendation. And feel free again to ask any specific questions during our Q&A sessions if you have any more questions about that. And I can also allow our fellows that are joining us today to share any advice they have about that as well. You'll need a letter of support from a host organization. You'll be required to submit the MOU, which there's a link to that on our website as well, signed and dated by the applicant and the host organization. A short writing sample. We've definitely gotten questions about that. We don't have a minimum and we don't have a maximum. Again, we just want a writing sample that allows you to showcase your writing ability. And, we don't want to set any limits just because we know, if we set a hard limit of 12 pages max, for example, 1 page over would not make or break it. So we don't want to set any limits. I think as long as you submit something that you're proud of and you think showcases your ability to write well, would work. A 250 word abstract, including a possible piece of scholarly work drawing on the fellowship experience that you would write for our forum, is also required. And then a resume with any information. So a resume is required, but, and we've also gotten questions about this, any grades or awards that you've gotten because of your grades should not be included in your resume. If you do include them, we will redact that information. So after all the applications are submitted, Nico and I will go over them and make sure, people didn't accidentally include grades or something like that. Same thing for the letters of rec. The letters of rec are not allowed to, whoever's writing a letter of rec is not allowed to say, oh, this student got a DS in my class. If that happens, we will redact that information. And I'm happy to answer any more specific questions about that as well. And then the applicant must be willing to help evaluate applications for the fellowship for up to 10 years. This one's a little bit of course, if we reach out to you after you're a fellow and you can't that year. We're not going to like hold it against you, but we would like for our fellows to be available if they can to help us evaluate applications after they're done with their fellowship. Again, the application is due Monday, November 14th at 5 p.m. via our CARET portal system. And then how we will select, or not we, but our evaluators will select the fellows. We have a few criteria lined out in our website. Again, Nico and I can't really say exactly how you will be selected, since law review editors have absolutely no say in which fellows are selected. But some of the criteria that is highlighted and that we share with our evaluators include so applicants who demonstrate prior public interest experience and how they intend to serve the public interest via their fellowship. The demonstrated, the sponsoring organizations demonstrated effectiveness in addressing the needs of marginalized communities, the applicant's character, including their ability to adapt to challenging circumstances, work with others on a shared project, etc. The applicant's writing ability as demonstrated by the writing sample, an abstract submitted in their application materials. And again, all of these criteria are on our website in the fellowship tab, so you feel free to look them over. I know we've gotten some questions in the past about some of the criteria, and again, Nico and I can't really give exact answers just because, again, we don't know exactly like which one the evaluators will weigh more heavily than the other. And we also don't want to make sure that, you know, Nico and I or any editors on the law review are not telling the evaluators how they should necessarily select fellows. But again, we're also happy to answer any questions you may have about that. Criteria that is not considered, I've already mentioned one of these, so that includes the applicant's undergrad, graduate, or law school grades or academic honors. Again, we will redact that information if you do include it. And also your name. Your name will not be considered. We will also make sure to redact any information that highlights your name and any other contact information. And the last important thing to share is that editors of the law review do not receive preference, and no current editor is involved in evaluating these applications. Okay, I think I went over the main or the most important parts of the fellowship application. What I will do now, Nico, feel free to chime in if I've forgotten anything. What I'll do now is allow our current, two of our current fellows to introduce themselves, share which project they're working on, where they're at, who their host organization is, how they felt last year, if they have any advice this year for our applicants. And then what we're going to do is open it up for a Q&A session, since I think that's mainly what people are interested in. So I will hand it off to Melanie.
Oh, one just quick boring detail before we get to Melanie and Dee's really exciting stories is that all of the information that Priscilla had just talked about can be found specifically on harvardlawreview.org/fellowship. And then if you have any questions, please address them via email to harvardlawreview.fellowship@gmail.com. And either Priscilla or I will get back to you. But now that's out of the way, love to hear from Melanie or Dee.
Okay, I'll go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie. I use she, her pronouns. I know a few of you, some of you very well. So I am in my second month of my fellowship at A Better Balance. So A Better Balance is mission is working specifically for folks who are caregiving or who are parenting and working at the same time. The focus of my project is family and medical leave. So right now I am working in A Better Balance's Nashville, Tennessee office. They have a headquarters in New York City, but I'm down here in the Southern office. I'm actually from Nashville, so it's really great to be home. But yeah, so I have really not been in my fellowship too long. It's been a month and a couple of days, but pretty much the main things that I've been working on are education and outreach. I'm trying to connect with folks specifically in rural communities in Tennessee, which is where I'm originally from, but also something that's very difficult to do because there's not as much infrastructure, not as many organizations serve those areas. So that's sort of the one aspect of my project is that outreach and education. And the other aspect is that I staff our free legal helpline. So we have folks calling from all over the country, telling us about their issues at work. They were denied disability accommodations. They aren't allowed to breastfeed at work or pump at work. So, and that's been sort of my two major things that I've really been focusing on lately. And it's honestly been a really amazing experience, especially to be able to be home and do this for folks that are fellow Tennesseans. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the HLR process. So I know probably a lot of y'all are going through like the fellowship process where it's like SCAD and EJW, now HLR, Justice Catalyst. So the good thing about the process is that it sort of forces you to do a lot of work on the front end. So a lot of the materials that I already had for SCAD and EJW, I was able to incorporate into my HLR application. Sort of the one big thing that was different and that I had to sort of start from scratch with was the paper proposal. What I ended up writing was pretty simple. And the other thing about the paper proposal that you're not really tied to it. If you find something during your fellowship that you really, really want to write about, then just go for it. But what I did is I just sort of found a particular gap in a particular law, and I'm like, this may be something that may adversely affect this specific group of people. So pretty basic. But yeah, but as far as my writing sample, I used one from my first summer internship between 1L and 2L when I worked for the ACLU of Southern California. And I would say that if you can, if you have experience working in like nonprofit organizations over the summer, or even during clinics, I would probably try to use those sort of writing samples over maybe ones that you did during like LRW or for a class. That's just sort of what my experience was, but could be different. You could have a really, really strong paper from, I don't know, your Civ Pro seminar. I don't know if that's a thing, but something like that. But overall, the application process went pretty well for me. As far as my recommenders, also, I'm just trying to like go through the whole application and see if I have any advice for y'all. For the recommenders, I chose one professor who I had taken a class with, and a very writing intensive class. So she could sort of speak to my writing abilities. And then I chose another professor who supervised me in a clinic, and he more so could speak to sort of my work in the field, work with clients. So yeah, I tried to sort of vary the two, but they were both professors at Harvard. But like Priscilla was saying, you're not required to do that. Those are just the folks that I thought would who'd best represent me. And I'm trying to think. So the interview was really exciting too. I'm not sure if y'all are doing the same sort of setup this year, but we were interviewed by past HLR editors who are now working in the public interest space. So it was a great opportunity to just like, first of all, like meet these folks and really get to see like where these people are now and like sort of get an idea of where you could possibly be in the future. But they also asked some really interesting questions because they were members of several different institutions around the country. So they all had sort of their unique perspective on public interest work, what they're looking for in a fellow. But overall, everyone was very kind. Something that one of the interviewers noted and asked me about in my interview was my host organization letter of support. So we had used that in pretty much the same thing in our SCAD applications and our EJW applications, and then just adapted it to the Harvard Law Review application. But something that one of the interviewers really said is that it seemed like that my host org really like had a lot of faith and confidence in me and were really sort of vouching for me. And so that's sort of something that came up during the interview, and they were like, why? Why do they like you so much? So it's great to sort of show in the host org letters or any of your other materials that not only are you a good candidate as sort of like a lawyer and someone who can do the job, but also that you have maybe a more personal attachment or like a really good reason why you want to do this kind of work. That's sort of what I found. But yeah, I know I've been talking a lot, so I definitely want to have Dee talk. And yes, I will definitely answer any questions that y'all have.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, that overview is really helpful. Hi all, I'm Dee. I use they, them pronouns. I graduated in 2020. I clerked for 2 years and set both of those clerkships up before 3L was over. So I applied for fellowships during my first clerkship. Sorry, I was thinking a lot about fellowships during my first clerkship, but I secured this fellowship host during the first clerkship, but I applied during my second one. And so for anyone who's kind of doing that simultaneous application process, happy to talk strategy there. Judy is an excellent resource for everyone, no matter what stage you are at when you're applying for fellowships. I'm glad she's on this call. She was an invaluable resource for me as I went through this process with all of my anxiety around the different stages. And so I knew what I wanted to do when I started law school, and it was just a matter of sticking to it and getting enough experiences around Boston and over my summers to have a great fellowship application later on. And that was serving LGBT people, specifically trans people, behind bars. I was able to do that through PLAP during my internship at GLAD and at Sylvia Rivera Law Project in my second summer. I also worked at the ACLU in one of my summers, though I wasn't able to work on any prison clients there. I did not intern with the organization that I ended up selecting as my host, Rights Behind Bars. And I think that was an interesting process for me. I knew that I wanted to be in a movement lawyering organization. I knew that I wanted to ensure I served people behind bars primarily. And I wanted a place that support my personal project, doing trans rights. And I knew that there are trans organizations and LGBT national organizations out there that would allow me to pitch this project with them, but perhaps upon arrival, I wouldn't be focused on that work. I wanted to make sure that I could do prison work more than doing trans policy or trans free world work, because I identify as a prison abolitionist, because I think that centering trans people behind bars is a very important part to the movement that I see myself as part of. And so as a movement lawyer, I wanted to collaborate with Black and Pink, which is a pen pal organization. There's a Black and Pink Massachusetts branch. And I thought this project is exactly what people should want to fund. This is, movement lawyering is where I think public interest needs to go in the direction of, if we're trying to critique or grow from the lessons we've learned about impact litigation and the kind of, I don't want to say failings, but I just said it. The inadequacy of just doing impact litigation. I wanted to ensure that the work I did was grounded by activists who are bringing attention to these issues because they are in touch with people, not saying, I have a case strategy, I need to go find the perfect plaintiff for it now. And so a lot of work on campus was about critiquing both impact litigation in the places that I was at, and thinking through in a conference that I hosted for this intersection of LGBT people and criminal justice reform. And so I wanted recommenders who could speak to those parts of myself. Professor Minnow is my con law teacher, but she also advised independent clinic at GLAD. And so I thought she'd be the perfect recommender because I was writing weekly reflections about GLAD, critiquing GLAD, and saying, why is everyone calling in from prison? And their hotline had so many prison callers every week, but they had they had one client actively who was behind bars, and they weren't taking any of these intakes that were calling, but they were looking constantly for a specific niche. And my second recommender was Professor Paul Butler, who was not a Harvard professor, but was a visiting professor and taught my 1L crim class, and who I also brought back to campus as a panelist on at the conference that I hosted in 12 fall. And he kind of knew my approach to abolition and to this intersectional approach to trans rights and prisoners' rights. And so I wanted recommenders who would speak to who I was, not just who I was in the classroom or who I was on a final project, but I did want the professor perspective more than just getting an employer, right? But so these were recommendations. My references were all employers. They were supervisors of work. So a clinical supervisor, this is for other fellowship. I don't know if we had to give references that were not the recommenders of fellowship, but since you'll have to do this for other fellowships, I'd recommend if you have the professor approach for the recommendation letters to ensure that you have references who saw your daily work. And so, yeah, after an informational, meeting, I met with Rights Behind Bars, the two attorneys that were there, executive director and litigation director. And this organization is only in its third year. So it's a startup, and it received its initial funding from Harvard's very own public service venture fund. And so I knew that they understood the struggle of the fellowship process. I had already decided by the time that I met with them that I was not going to be applying for anything that would prevent me from doing trans prison work, which meant I took myself out of the running for a SCAD-in fellowship, which I think drove Judy nuts, but also I think was the right decision for what I want to do. I did not have a host by the time I met with them because I was kind of gung-ho on the Center for Constitutional Rights Bertha Fellowship. I thought it'd be the perfect place for me. One of my mentors worked there and I knew they were bringing trans prison cases. And then I met this organization and I talked to them. I thought this is actually perfect. And so I would just say, give yourself time over the next year plus to not rush into picking a host. I'm happy to announce that after this 1-year fellowship, host organization has agreed to keep me on board as an attorney, which I did not expect, and which I know CCR would not have done, and most fellowship patients do not do. And so that's a really huge benefit going for a good fit and making sure that you are picking an organization that aligns with your values and let you do your work and will also be kind of supportive of your future career. I also am happy to announce that I have had 8 potential clients from the Black and Pink Massachusetts collaboration has worked out. We signed a MOU, a memorandum of understanding with them, and they've sent over 8 different names of our potential clients. I have amicus work and possible merits counsel work for trans people behind bars already pending, and it's really is the perfect fit for my project. My paper proposal has linked to this project. So I was kind of juggling between 2 potential topics. I really thought kind of from a public interest, introspective perspective, that movement lawyering, impact litigation, critique could be an interesting paper. What is movement lawyering? But the merits of the work ended up being what I wrote my proposal on, and I think is going to be what I write this essay on, and it's what I've pitched again. And it's using the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act to advance trans rights behind bars, which is contentious because there are people who do not want gender dysphoria, or however you call it, to be seen as a disability. Just like homosexuality was removed from the DSM, there are those who believe anything to do with gender identity, used to be called gender identity disorder, anything to do with trans identity should be removed from the DSM and should not be stigmatized or seen as a disability. But it's a successful argument, and it just won in the Fourth Circuit in a case called Williams v. Kincaid that GLAD and others brought, and that Black and Pink Massachusetts was actually on as well. And so I'm curious. I was an anthropology undergraduate student, and I'm very curious to know how trans plaintiffs see this approach, how lawyers in the movement see the approach, and I want to talk to dissenters. I want to talk to people who are in the movement who disagree with bringing this case. I know a couple at least, one of whom I'm really in touch with and who looked at my project proposal when I applied for EJW and thought, this is scary. He literally was like, we can talk strategy about this work later, but I really strongly disagree with this approach. Don't bring ADA claims. And so I'll reach back out to him and try to have, an interview with him about but at the end of the day, I think I'm happier than I have been during the past clerkship, for sure. It feels like I'm 100% aligned to the work I meant to do. This abolitionist organization, has a goal of getting people out. The case that really convinced me to go with them over CC is called Vino v. Souza. 86% of people at Immigration Detention Center in Massachusetts were taken out of it and freed because of the work that these lawyers did with others in movement. And so I, will continue trying to remedy abuses behind bars through movement and litigation. And I think that organizations like Rights Behind Bars need all the support they can get. So if you're interested in prison litigation, or if you're interested in trans rights, I'm happy to answer questions about the merits of that, and also happy to talk more about the process. I don't remember my interview questions or answers. I'm really, really sorry about that.
Thank you so much for that. As I hope it's been helpful for those that joined us today, sort of getting a sense of, the fellows that received this fellowship and the work that they do. I also posted in our chat, we have a get to know our fellows page where you can learn about the other fellows as well and the work that they are doing. But yeah, so what we'll do now is we'll open it up for a Q&A session. Feel free to address some of these questions to me or to our fellows who are here. But we want to be as helpful as possible, so feel free to ask any questions now. And you feel free to message me privately if you don't want to ask the question out loud, or even include it in the chat. Yeah, I will open it up for questions now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this very helpful session. I had 2 questions, I guess, for anyone, for Priscilla and Nico, if you have any feedback, and then also for Dee and Melanie, if you remember what you wrote. But my question's about the host letter of support and then the project proposal. I'm wondering what you're looking for, in that short amount of space, the proposal is 700 words. So wondering if there's certain things to emphasize, such as are you looking at the feasibility? Can this really be done in a year? Are you looking at what connections you have on the ground? Just wondering if there's certain things that you're looking for and that should be emphasized. And then same thing for the host letter, and also wondering if there's a page limit with that.
Great question. I will cover what I can, which is I really can't say exactly what the evaluators were looking for, other than the criteria that I've mentioned earlier today. But I think it might be helpful to hear from Melanie and Dee if they have any thoughts on that, and maybe if you're willing to share sort of your approach to those 2 parts of the application when you apply.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it, since I already talked a little bit about my host letter. So I think my host letter was 5 or 6 pages. It was pretty long. So, and I don't know if that, I guess it worked out, but but as far as the project proposal, that was something that was difficult for me to sort of distill down what I wanted to do for the next year into not that many characters. I believe that when I did the Skadden Fellowship, it had a similarly small word limit. So I may advise you to sort of draw some from that. But also, I think my host org was really helpful with drafting that. I got so many versions of all of my answers with track changes all over the place. And it would make me feel at first it would make me feel like I totally messed it up, and I did, and I should just give up now. But that was honestly so helpful for them, because since they are also folks who are working in this public interest space, the evaluators were, at least for our year, folks that are sort of detached from law school a bit more, and sort of rooted more in the real world, they're a really great resource to sort of say, does this make sense? And does this sound like something that you would want to support? Because yeah, it's a difficult sort of exercise in condensing what you want to say about your project. I'm mainly focused. The thing that was hard for me is that I have a very personal connection to my project. I am someone who was raised by a single mom who has faced the same sort of issues that the folks that I'm now helping are. And I actually didn't really have space in this this application to talk a lot about that, which I inevitably ended up bringing up in the interview, which I think is a good way to balance it out. So I think now that I'm looking back to my project proposal, I definitely think it was more so like, here are the practical things that I think I can get done. A little bit less so, it's like, this is what I've been wanting to do all of my life. But that was just me. And I also haven't looked over my application in a while, but I do remember struggling with that. And I took a lot also from, if you had to do that EJW like schedule of all of the different things that you're going to do, I tried to sort of modify that into that short format and just sort of elevated like the highlights of what you're gonna do, and maybe even talk about like what your goal, your ultimate goal would be in this project, more so than just like the day-to-day, this is what I'm going to work on, but maybe something that like the change that you want to make and the change you want to work for too.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Like really good advice. I think that my approach was to take the different parts of my EGW application and condense it into what fit for the project proposal here. I didn't see my host's letter of support until I think this application they submit on their own for the EGW, if I'm not mistaken. I'm so sorry if the plane overhead means you can't hear me. I'm currently in Baltimore for an anarchist book talk. Okay, great, you can hear me. And so I read it after they sent it over for this, and I think they really are highlighting why you're a good fit for their organization, that they have the resources to support you, and kind of proof of concept is a term that I learned from Judy that's really, really vital. My organization had already brought an appellate case, a federal circuit case representing a trans person behind bars by the time we were applying. So if they can highlight that they've done the kind of work that you're proposing to do with them, thank you. Sorry, someone just complimented my hair. If you can highlight that in your portion, as well as if they can highlight it in their letter, I think that's really, really good. I think the project proposal is also a chance to show your strategy, like a little bit of, who you've contacted already. Have you done work like this in your internships, right? Like, I'm thinking about it more like a cover letter, or like a statement of purpose for applying to law school than like the really long application that EGW gave you. You need to fit a lot into the short amount of work they give you, so make sure you don't miss any of those parts. And if your passion doesn't shine through, I think you've missed that opportunity, right? So it shouldn't just be facts and details. I think the interview is a great time to show the why, but that should also be visible here. I think that my interviewers, if I remember, did not ask me at all about the paper proposal, which I was kind of ready and prepared for and nervous about. It was all about my project, the movement lawyering strategy, what movement lawyering meant to me, why this organization versus a trans organization, a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act approach. And it was really like, tell us about you. Why do you want to do this? What do you want to do in the future? And so I don't know that I had kind of in my project proposal some of that, especially the future career looking elements, but I know that it touched heavily on what they were asking about. So strategy of your proposed project, and I guess also why it's necessary, right? Are you filling an unmet need, or are you joining other lawyers who are calling for help because there aren't enough people doing this, which is the case for me. And so to make your project stand out in those ways, or in whatever way you think it's unique, I think that would be really, really awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And just to be more explicit, we don't have a page limit or minimum for the letter of support from your host organization. I think the rule of thumb for us is if it's not like it on our website, like if there's no limit or minimum, then anything is fair game. Obviously, no one would ever submit, I think, like a 1,000-page letter of support. So I don't think we're too worried about that. But whatever they think would be enough to speak to you and that their ability to support you as a fellow and things like that. But thank you so much. That was very helpful. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Oh, I have a quick one for both of you. I know you all both touched on this a little bit, but just thinking about your paper proposals, I was wondering, I guess, how you thought about like how much you felt like it needed to connect with like the kind of central work that you were doing with your project. Because like I have like my project is going to be about like gender affirming care with like insurance coverage, and I have some like things that I've been simmering around, like thinking about writing regarding like administrative law around like some of that work, but that's not necessarily like set like the exact central insurance work that I would be doing. And so I'm curious how like, I guess, direct you felt that needed to be for your proposals.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing stuff during my fellowship in the first month that I didn't know I was going to be doing. So it's all very much been like an evolving process for me. I wrote my project, I mean, the paper proposal specifically about the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, and sort of what I see as a gap in its coverage for rural workers. So like very specific to my project. If you're wondering, so like to apply for the FMLA and be eligible for the FMLA, your employer has to have 50 employees within a 75-mile radius in order to be eligible. So like small businesses, folks living in rural communities definitely don't have that. So that like pretty much directly ties to what I imagined my project was going to be. But now that I'm in my project, I have been doing a lot more with pregnancy discrimination and disability discrimination. So I think I tried to tie it to my project proposal as much as I could, but I think I also went in with the thought that this is an evolving concept. And yeah, I just sort of wrote, and I also I'm not like super experienced with doing like journal writing, so I kind of just found something that I thought would be like interesting to talk about, but we'll see if that actually like turns out. But yeah, I think I tried to sort of tie it to the points and maybe the overarching goals and philosophy of my project, but I didn't really say like, oh, well, I'm going to go to this organization and they're going to tell me this, and then I'm going to put it in my paper, So I definitely kept it, I think, a little bit more vague, maybe not vague, but like more of a broader base idea. And I think also, like Dee said as well, I don't think they even asked me about my paper proposal during my interview, but I'm sure that they definitely looked at it during the initial screening process. But yeah, I don't know if that's helpful at all, actually, but I'm like, they do exactly what you think you want to do.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I saw it kind of as an opportunity to do a preemption check of the sort. So I found a couple of articles by Kevin Berry and Jennifer Levi who had brought, well, I think they both have brought cases. I know Jennifer has, bringing the Americans with Disabilities Act legal strategy into the court. They've written a lot on it. So kind of I actually put it like as an inline citation, like to show that I've looked into it. Oh no, am I freezing? No, I'm good. I hope I'm good. And so I think that to the extent that your project proposal is not academic, I think this is a chance to show the academic underpinnings of whatever tie there is. It's not like the cases that you bring will have to be 100% like the strategy that you're writing about. That just happens to be the way that I did it, and it went really hand in glove. But I do think that if it's completely far off. It's like, okay, these are kind of disparate. I think that it could be really a powerful proposal for this specific fellowship if the work that you're doing will enhance or influence and inform the eventual essay. I think that's really the beauty of the fellowship as I see it. And so like Melanie sounds like it's going to be a really enhanced essay from the proposal to now because of the things that she's writing about and it's within the world of what she had pitched all together as a package. And so I think if you're really interested in a certain administrative law element to the work, but like your projects on gender affirming care and want to write about like administrative law and gender affirming care and like some sure and that package because the work that we're doing, and this is how kind of anyone who's trying to also open the door of professorial work thinks about it, like what can I, and from clerk it, right? It's like you're doing so much stuff that is in the weeds. How can you pull from that and talk about or write a 40-page article? It's really hard to find the time, I will say, to do that, but to show that you're thinking about things in terms of like, okay, this is something that I can do in the world to make a difference and have a positive impact for people I care about. And also, this is a really compelling, interesting legal thing that I can write about or I can probe and analyze and bring another perspective into. I forgot to mention with my project proposal, the paper proposal, I pointed to queer theory and crypt theory, disability rights theory, as lenses that I wanted to apply as approaching the problem, because I don't think many people who've written on this so far have really brought those lenses to it. So if there's something novel, that's kind of the article selection committee word of choice that I love and I have held on to. If there's anything novel you can point to in your paper proposal, I think that would be really, really helpful. After you've kind of shown, I've done a survey of what's out there, and this is how my paper would be a little different, either informed by my work or because I have a different perspective already.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, that was super, super helpful. And hope it was helpful for you. I'm going to post an essay in the forum by one of our former fellows who just published last spring, if you want to get a sense of like, what they or what some fellows have written about. Yeah, does anyone have any other questions?
I will just going back to the project proposal thing, the paper proposal thing for just a minute. So I wanted to distinguish that Dee has been clerking for 2 years. I came right out of law school. So there's a different sort of writing that comes with it. So if you're listening to Dee and you're like, wow, I don't know if I could do sort of deep dive academic, that's fine, because I pretty much stopped taking huge like lecture classes my 2L year. So I pretty much the only things that I did my 3L year was clinics and like one legal profession class. So I was definitely from a different sort of writing perspective that maybe coming out of a clerkship would be. So I think just recognizing that like you have probably your strengths and weaknesses, then just run with those as opposed to thinking like, oh, I have to, cite a bunch of cases or something like that, So I just wanted to clarify that, yeah, I was like fresh out of law school. I was in the 3L year. Don't really know how to do legal writing that well. But yeah, just wanted to clarify.
Thanks for
And
that.
I'm a nerd.
Sorry, go ahead. I think kind of a related question is if you can give us any indication of like in general terms without revealing who they are, the backgrounds of the folks who are selecting. So I think that might inform the kind of writing that we would submit for a writing sample, for example, whether it's something more like a master's thesis versus a portion of a brief or something would change based on who's reading it. So I'd just be curious if you could shed any light on that.
Yeah, I can't, share specific names, especially too, because we're currently in the process of figuring out who those people will be. But for like initial screening, we have Harvard Law Review alums that are currently in public interest positions review. The applications, obviously, not obviously, but most of them, if not all of them, are a few years out. Obviously, we don't want like people to be reviewing them if somehow they can also apply to this fellowship. And then our interviewers are faculty members that have also done public interest work. We've transitioned to asking faculty members outside of the law school due to potential conflicts of interest. We don't want, again, people interviewing students from Harvard who they got a letter of recommendation from. So not sure if that's the question. Yeah, if that was if helpful in any way, but
Yeah, no, that is helpful. I mean, just to know if it's academics versus practitioners, for example, it's helpful just to frame sort of who's our audience and what's compelling for them. So that's helpful. Thanks.
I just for thinking about this for other fellowships too, Riley, I would put a premium on unedited writing samples, things that only you have worked on, and things that are aligned to, like if they're reading something and it's not related to your project, it's just a missed opportunity to have another lens on, like, this is the kind of work I want to do, this is stuff I'm writing about. So I would think less about how high level compared to, answering a legal question like in a memo for a summer. I would rather think about, is this on a topic that I could use as like extra proof that I care about this thing that I'm trying to do? Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
I will hop in and ask a question. First, thank you all so much for hosting this, and also to Melanie and Dee for sharing your perspectives on the fellowship process. It's so helpful. This is a question, I think, for anyone in the group that may have insight on it, but for applicants that are currently completing a non-HLR fellowship and would essentially be reapplying to fellowships this year, do you all have like any tips or tricks on how, reapplicants should be approaching their proposal, approaching their application as a whole, and if there's anything we should be doing differently than, yeah, thanks. I also recognize that Melanie and Dee are not in this situation, so apologies if this is an unfair question.
I'm sorry, I blanked. What is the specific situation? I was writing something in the thread and I missed the key of your question, Alexis. I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. So I am currently in a non-HLR fellowship, so I would be essentially reapplying for different funding with the same host organization. And so I was just curious if the HLR fellowship has kind of a policy on reapplicants, or if there's advice for reapplicants and how to approach their application for this year. But again, recognizing that you are not in that situation, or you weren't that kind of applicant. So
I can just quickly jump in for the policy side. I don't know if I have any advice, especially since I've never done a fellowship or applied for one. But I don't think we necessarily have any policy against people applying for this fellowship if they are currently in another fellowship. I think if anything, my advice would be just being ready to answer questions about that. I'm assuming that would be, on your resume, and it would come up in your application. So obviously you would need to address that, in your application and or during the interviewing process as well. Not sure if that's helpful though in any way.
Yeah, and I would think that obviously I'm not in this situation. I would think that in the host letter, that's a really good place for them to be like, look at all the things that Alexis has done so far for us. We love her so much and we want to keep her and we want her to continue doing this work. So I think that is a good opportunity to sort of have that directly, like, here's what we've already done, this, and we need this fellowship to continue doing this really important work.
I'm not sure how much this, yeah, I think Justice Catalyst also funds rarely people who are reapplicants. I think something that's pretty important is like, what were you able to do in your first year? what did you think you were able to do, and what did you actually accomplish, and what would the second year allow you to do that's maybe still a pending project, or if you're really close to filing complaint and you want to see it through the settlement and possibly trial, right? Like, what are the things that this would allow, and to really focus on that. But it's a great opportunity to show, like, especially if you are in a fellowship right now, this is what I said I would do in my fellowship. This is what I really did. So proof of concept right there. And that you've done well, and that you've built these connections and you want to keep fostering them. I hope that people will see that, and that you're able to get more funding.
Thank you all so much.
Okay, any other questions? I'll give it about a minute to see if anyone else has any other questions.
Also, while people are thinking, just want to say that I went through this process last year and it was horrible. And it was so demoralizing at times. And it just, I feel what you guys are going through right now. It was a very difficult process, and luckily everything worked out, and everyone that I knew who was trying to get a fellowship got a fellowship and are very happy with what they're doing. And I think it's just important to recognize like how difficult this process is. Same for applying for clerkships too. It's sort of luck of the draw sometimes. And there are times where you feel like, well, I'm just a complete failure. Why did I not get the specific fellowship? But I just wanted to reiterate that that is normal, and that happened to me quite a few times. And it has ultimately worked out for the better, because without HLR, I wouldn't have been able to do this position. And then I'm clerking next year. So it was like a perfect fit for me to have this 1-year fellowship. So like everything worked out. Everything will be fine. You just have to make sure that you keep remembering why you want to do this work and what is really driving you.
Cool. Okay. If no one has any other questions, I think that's a great way to end this info session. I guess I will also end it on a personal note. Not that any of you need my advice, since again, I have never applied to fellowship, but my motto is always never count yourself out. The worst since we don't select, but the worst that can happen is you'll get a no, but you'll never know if you don't actually apply. So do submit your materials if you have them, and if you want to count yourself in and see whether you can get this fellowship. But if you have any other questions that come up, again, you can email them to us. Our email address for the fellowship is harvardlawreview.fellowship@gmail.com. And then again, we have all of this information on our website as well. But thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Melanie and Dee, for joining. We are so grateful for you being able to attend and sharing your advice. Thank you as well to Judy, who I've heard from so many people that she is just incredibly helpful. And if you have not reached out to her already, you definitely should if you're applying to any sort of fellowship. So yeah, thank you again. I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thanks so much for doing this.